somebody, and one of the techniques that I do when I'm writing is to try to understand the viewpoint of the person that I disagree with. Not so that I can agree with them, but because if I understand where they're coming from, then I can answer that more effectively. And it humanizes them, and it makes me less likely to be nasty to them, because I tell you, time and time again, in the political realm particularly, the people that you're on the opposite sides of the table from today are going to be your allies in some future fight. It never ceases to amaze me how people who I would never consider to be a friend end up being an ally a year from then or 2 years from then. So burning bridges politically is never a good idea. But so far I haven't, ever been accused of libeling anybody. I've been accused occasionally of inaccuracies, but I'm pretty good about correcting myself on my blog publicly if I've made a mistake or if I get new information that, changes my opinion. And I have changed my opinion about things too, so I try to be honest. Honestly, at the end of the day, I try to be very honest, and I try not to attack people directly. So I don't think that takes you very far.
Who is your audience?
That's a good question. Right now it seems to be, in Michigan right now particularly, it seems to be a lot of the union folks and people who are dissatisfied with our current government and of the Democratic Party, who is seen by a lot of people as not being very effective at rallying the troops, organizing the people at the grassroots, and advocating on behalf of the activists at the ground level. So I think a lot of those people are gratified that somebody's saying, hey, there is a different way to do this that could be more effective, so that's a big part of it. And I think there's a lot of people who are just generally looking at the Midwest as a region, Ohio and Indiana and Wisconsin and Michigan, who are sort of had this ground shift a year ago in the election to a more conservative legislature and governorship and stuff, and trying to keep tabs on all that stuff. So I think that much like I have counterparts in the other states that are blogging about the issues in their states, particularly in Wisconsin. I and a couple other people in Michigan are trying to make sure that everybody's that we're sounding the alarm about what's going on here, and that's the audience, I think.
Is there a way potentially for you to band together? Do we need some sort of Midwest blogger coalition?
Yeah, that's something that we've talked about, and I think right now they're soliciting ideas for Netroots Nation next year out in Rhode Island, and that's something that I've actually considered as a panel discussion about more unified blogging from a regional standpoint. Last year I attended a session about state blogs and saw some different ways that people do that. For example, Blogging for Michigan is a state blog, and talking to people from like Texas and Wisconsin and stuff, and how they coordinate when posts go up and how they support each other, and tweeting and Facebook and all the social media stuff. But I think it could happen on even a bigger scale, like you're suggesting, a regional scale, maybe a Midwestern bloggers coalition, where we're sort of, even if it's just talking once a month on a conference call about what's coming up and what things people should be hitting. If we're a little more coherent with our message, then we're going to be more impactful in terms of maybe having people see the issue in a different way.
What about the Occupy movement? Has that captured your imagination, and is that part of what you want to report on? Is it going to revitalize journalism in the sense of saying, that's why I started the Occupy journalism blog. It's because of the idea that I think this new approach saying we're the 99% and we need to figure out, regardless of party, how we're going to change the culture. Yeah,
I'm very excited about the Occupy movement. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how it emerges from the winter months, because right now it's a physical presence, and particularly in a place like Michigan, it's really difficult to maintain a physical presence in the middle of a blizzard. And I do think that the mainstream media sources, if you want to call it that, will lose interest over time if it's the same picture of a bunch of tents in a park. So what'll be interesting for me is to see what this is the genesis of, what it becomes in terms of activating people to do it, because all of this is a lot of hand waving unless we can turn it into some solid change particularly at the legislative level. I mean, you really frankly have to take that energy and that focus and that message and turn it into better lawmakers, because at the end of the day, it's the lawmakers that make the decisions about all of the things that we're upset about. And if we want better regulation of the banks, for example, which I think is one of the central coherent themes coming out of Occupy, then we need to elect people that are not beholden to Citibank and Wells Fargo and all these groups and getting insane amounts of money from them. because those people are never going to bite that hand that feeds them, and so we need better legislators to make those laws. That's part of it. I mean, I'm a pretty pragmatic person, and at my core, I really feel like everything comes down to who we choose to be our leaders, and sometimes that means that we have to step up as leaders and take charge of those things. So I'm very encouraged by what I see. I think it's raising awareness in ways that I never dreamed it would. If you look at, for example, how many times the word deficit's mentioned in the last month on newscasts versus, other themes coming out of the Occupy movement, nobody's talking about deficit like they were before, but a lot of people are talking about, holding, bankers accountable for what they did to our economy and things like that, and that's good. That's if all we did was change the conversation, that's a huge step forward. But I do hope, I do think there are some leaders emerging and stuff out of this movement, and I do think that there's going to be some. I think we'll see folks next year, particularly in an election year, getting more involved with, promoting their causes and promoting good candidates that will help to promote those in, ways that are meaningful to change laws.
If 94% of the people elected in this country happen to be the candidate that had the most money, and the corporations are the ones who are putting the bulk of the money in, then it seems to me that if we don't reform this system, we run the risk of being Tahrir Square in a few years. And those seem to me to be the two choices.
I agree. And Citizens United that Citizens United ruling was probably the most damaging thing that I've ever seen happen to our society, really, when it comes right down to it. And we haven't even begun to really feel the effects from that, because we haven't had a presidential election, for one thing, or a serious Senate run since it passed. So we're going to really see an insane amount of money pouring in to these elections, and I am really frightened by that. And it really shows the need for this Occupy movement to galvanize and to become at least coherent around in certain areas so that we are effective, because otherwise, if we split ourselves off, as us progressive liberals have been so well known for, and dilute our impact, then that's just we're right picking then for the corporate interest to come in and just really own our government, and that is we're already part of the way down that slope. It's going to be it's going to require a real strong push from a lot of people to reverse that trend. We've got to, though.
Chris Hayes said this morning on that wonderful news show on MSNBC that he calls Up because you got to get up really early on a weekend just to hear him. He talked about how the country has relentlessly been dragged rightward, and that is part of the problem. I mean and I think he was quite accurate when he said we didn't know when we elected President Obama that we were electing a moderate Republican from the 1990s.
He's right about that.
And I don't know. I mean, can blogs help pull the country leftward?
I do think that that's possible if it's done in a way that's articulate and that reaches people in their core belief system. I've heard this referred to as the Overton window, which is basically the framework from which we view society, and the more that window shifts to the right, the more all you see is what comes through that window, and if we shift to the right, we're only seeing things from a slightly right perspective, and it's important that we keep pulling that window back to the middle and try to bring it to the left if we want our values and our beliefs to be manifested in the laws of the land. And I think that good bloggers that are good writers and that are legitimate in terms of bringing together information and stuff and presenting it to people in ways that they can understand it and digest it and communicate it to other people, we can actually impact how, like right now, for example, the argument in Michigan is that teachers are parasitic leeches and they're responsible for all of the bad things that are happening in our schools for the most part, and that is an unbelievably conservative viewpoint, and it's one that, because it's been repeated so many times, that people that have been sort of non-interested in that issue, they just start to believe it because they hear it all the time, and they're hearing it from their legislators and their lawmakers. And it's incumbent upon people that have the ear of people, whether it's a blogger or a new journalist or whatever, editorial writer or whatever, to reframe that or to bring that frame back to the middle a little bit and remind people that these are our neighbors, these are the teachers that inspired us to do what we did when we were kids. When I think of the teachers that inspired me as a young person, I delivered their newspaper, I walked their dogs, they were part of my community, and that's the way teachers are now. But you would never know that to hear the way Republicans in particular are talking about teachers. To hear them talking about the teachers and the union that they formed to sort of, make sure that they're treated fairly, you'd think that they were responsible for pretty much everything that's wrong with our school systems. And in that whole conversation, it gets lost that the Republicans pulled $1 billion out of our education system last year. And so when you've got schools that are, you know, like Benton Harbor, for example, the MEA last week took a truckload of supplies into Benton Harbor schools because these teachers simply didn't have pencils and papers and, you know, the things that they need to teach children. That's happening for a reason, and it's not because teachers are greedy.
And it's that resentment politics that I think is so dangerous. They keep saying that the 1% argument is class warfare, but the real class warfare seems to me to be to divide the workers against each other.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I put up a blog post the other day titled fighting, you know, right where the 1% wants us, fighting over $2 waffle irons. You know, and okay, they didn't coordinate that, they didn't plan that out, but you know darn well they're sitting back there twiddling their Snidely Whiplash mustaches going, carry on, because that plays right in. If they've got us fighting over scraps, then they're not having to deal with us fighting them over laws and over, you know, being held accountable for what they're doing. So, you know, we've got to be really realistic about where we fight our battles, and if it's fighting them at Walmart for a $2 waffle iron, we're making a big mistake. But you're right, it's you know, pitting groups, and it's easy to do that with progressives because we're a bigger tent than the conservative tent is, and we let everybody in, and we let a lot of viewpoints in, and that's what makes us strong, but it's also an Achilles heel for us. So it requires really good leadership to coordinate all of that and to come out of the whole thing with a coherent message and a coherent direction so that we're effective.
Why has the mainstream media failed to use this new technology in a way to expand the voices that they carry?
Are you talking social media or?
No, I'm talking about things like the Gannett chain. When they had the money to innovate, they didn't innovate. Now they need to innovate and they don't have as much money.
Right.
But they still have enormous resources compared to an individual blogger.
Sure.
And it seems to me that they're happy to have you blog for them for free, but they don't seem to want to cultivate a handful of people who could really have an interesting array of community voices.
Yeah, I think that right now the big media, particularly print media, and also to some extent television, they're really scrambling and they're in desperation mode. And I think the company that owns MLive just recently literally let go of something like half of their staff. And you know, I honestly think that part of the reason why that hearing last week didn't get publicized is because they had a couple of people on Thanksgiving vacation and they just simply didn't have reporters to send there. And unless there's this epic clash of, you know, of the wills, you know, it's a lot easier just to take a couple of press releases and report from that. As to why, I honestly think they didn't see the boat as it was sailing off, and they missed an opportunity. And you're right, without the resources now, they're really scrambling to make up for lost time. It's going to require some really creative thinking. I honestly believe that journalism and media in general, as we know it now, will be so different in 5 years. I mean, you look at just the changes that are already happening. You know, if you want to advertise locally, your opportunities to do that are so diminished right now. In Ann Arbor, for example, AnnArbor.com only publishes a newspaper a few times a week. It's not every day. And if you want to advertise locally, you actually might do a better job advertising on Facebook. You know, and you know, I mean, the entire thing is money driven because you've got to pay for this stuff at the end of the day. So whether it's television commercials or ads in your newspapers or whatever, or a banner ad on a website, somebody's got to pay to make the whole thing work. And I think they missed the boat in terms of trying to figure out how to monetize all of that stuff and yet keep the integrity of the writing and the reporting that was going on with it.
If you're a blogger and you're trying to get eyeballs on your site, Facebook, the conversation occurs on Facebook instead of on your site. Far more frequently. It's people who read the headline, they get enough from that, they don't always come to the site.
Yeah, Twitter's even worse.
Twitter's even worse. That's all they care about is what you said in that. So you're not going to get any revenue from that. You will advance the conversation, but here's what my concern is. Those are two mega corporations where the government really does have a shutoff valve. If it ever really got to the point where it was being used for things, you might find that all of a sudden Eclectablog no longer has a face on Facebook.
That's a good point. And I would say that for the most part, I use those as tools, but they're only small pieces of an overall approach to getting my message out there. So some of it comes from cross-posting in a couple of different locations. And you know, I think that I use a sort of a full spectrum approach. Honestly, I don't spend a lot of time reading Twitter or reading Facebook, but I do use it as a way to get out my message. And there are times, I tell you, if something goes viral on Facebook, it's amazing what happens. I get, you know, my traffic spikes hugely for 2 or 3 days, so it's a phenomenon. But you know, sometimes it's just a matter of, I mean, in the process, I'm cultivating relationships with some media folks, like the folks at Maddow, Rachel Maddow Show, and other places too, where you start to become more listened to, so they're paying attention. So when you direct something to them and say, hey, take a look at this is interesting, they're more likely to read your email, they're more likely to read your tweet and say, hey, let's check this out. So sometimes one of the roles of folks like myself doing the kinds of things that I do is to raise the issue up. I can give you an example of this. In the last couple of weeks, I was promoting a petition that it was a high school kid and a junior high kid from Ann Arbor put a petition on change.org to try to change the so-called anti-bullying legislation that the Senate had passed. It was ridiculous. It was anything but anti-bullying, and it was really egregious. And these two kids, one's 13, one's 16, put this petition up. It's up to like 60,000 signatures in just a couple of weeks. Just a couple of school-age kids that have done this, and they were getting no press at all. So I wrote about them a couple of times, and you know, tweeted it to some of the journalists, sent some emails and stuff. And me, just this lowly blogger, got them some attention. Now, I don't take personal responsibility with it. I did contribute to that, and that's a role that citizen journalism can play, is to elevate stories to a level where it does get noticed by the broader mainstream media, so that we do get some attention to it. So that's another really useful and gratifying role that that you can play as a citizen journalist. I can tell you that I've written about things that my readers have never heard of, and they're really thankful that somebody brought it to their attention. And so that's when I'm pushing to get more eyeballs. Again, it's not because I want more web traffic so I can get more ad clicks. It's because I want to be able to speak to a large number of people about issues that they might not know about otherwise. If I can do that, that's really gratifying to me, and could change the world in a better way, in a good way.